الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا وانتنا ما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad wa alihi wasallam ajma'in. So alhamdulillah, we will start with our seventh session. And I was looking at the book today. I think inshallah we should be able to do two more sessions, I think, before Ramadan. And then we'll finish this book inshallah. And then we can start with Pinnacle Papers Volume 2, inshallah, which is Batin al-Itham, Inward Sin. We can start that after Ramadan, because we're now in Jamad al-Akhirah. And so we do one session in Rajab and one session in Sha'ban, inshallah, and then we'll continue. We'll take a break for Ramadan and continue in Shawwal. So alhamdulillah, we're going to pick up, inshallah, from the book. We're going to pick up on page 67 at the bottom. So the Imam finished again the point he was making as we finished last time, or the point he was making again, was recognizing that this abode that we're in is an abode of trial. It is an abode of tribulation. Why? So that we can manifest our accountability. So this is an abode of reward. This is an abode of punishment, and Allah is going to test us with both. So Allah will put us in trials and tribulation to see if we are patient. And Allah will give us times of ease and gives other blessings to see if we are grateful. So the Imam continues on the bottom of page 67. He says, perhaps you've looked at the states that people are in and you think that there are some anomalies there, or you think that you have some doubts. And you wonder, okay, well, why is it that there's some disobedient people who are immersed in their disobedience, and they're never woken up from tribulations and agonies? And on the other hand, you find some people who are pious and upright, but they seem to be always suffering from some sort of tribulation, some sort of affliction. And there are stubborn disbelievers who completely renounce their faith, and they live in complete comfort and luxury, and so on and so forth. Now, the Imam's going to break this down. He says, what you have to understand is Allah has created a perfect system, and Allah is a perfect Lord. So there are no anomalies, there are no lags, there are no glitches, as people like to say. What it boils down to is this, and this is especially the case with believers, right? So again, you might look out in the world, you see Muslims, you see, okay, there's a sinning Muslim, but he doesn't seem to have any problems or tribulations in his life. And then there's this righteous Muslim, and he seems to be suffering and seems to be in some sort of agony. There's one tribulation after another in his life, or one affliction after another. And what Imam al-Buti basically brings it back to is, well, how do you know? And this is what ultimately comes down to. You don't know what state these people are in and how they really conduct themselves. So you look at someone who outwardly does not look righteous, outwardly seems to be constantly engaged in sin. This is what you can see. But he says, maybe this disobedient person has some state of probity. Now, this is an English word people ask me about all the time. The word in Arabic is salah, meaning like a state of being correct, right? Or sort of maybe being righteous, right? So maybe you might see someone in the daytime, and he's up to all kinds of unsavory things, but you don't know why he does those things. Maybe there's some sort of force upon him. Maybe he's been compelled to do those things. Maybe he doesn't have a choice. Some people, due to employment circumstances, they have to work in jobs they don't want to work in, but they have financial obligations. They have people to provide for them, and so forth. But you don't know that maybe at night that person gets up and he prays to Hajj and he asks Allah for forgiveness. And he's asking Allah to rectify his state. And he's asking Allah to get him out of a situation. And because he's doing that, Allah is forgiving him, right? Maybe that person might be up to doing whatever he's doing outwardly, but you don't know. Maybe he's fasting at the same time, and Allah is forgiving him because of that. Maybe, and you don't know this, maybe he gives lots of money in charity, and Allah is forgiving him because of that. So again, you don't know. And then the flip side, you see someone who is righteous, outwardly righteous. Think, oh, look, that guy, he's a great guy. He's always in the masjid, praying 5 times a day, and he's reading Quran, and he does halaqat of dhikr, and it's all wonderful. But again, you don't know what he's like behind closed doors, right? He could be a wonderful guy in person, but maybe at home, he's not very good to his family. Maybe he's not very good to his wife. Maybe he doesn't take care of his kids. So you have to keep these things in mind, again, that you ultimately don't know, and Allah knows, right? We only see the snippets we see of other people, even people who are close to us, people we might consider friends or other family members. But I say, especially people we don't even live with, we really don't know what goes on in their lives. So again, like Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah gives the command. He says, "La tajassasu," like, don't spy, right? So we don't spy on people. We're not allowed to spy on people. Allah's forbidden that. So only Allah knows what truly goes on. And again, this again, like another point I think I mentioned before, when we talk about the Sharia, this is a good term that the Hanafis use a lot. They say like qada'an wa diyanatin, like qada', and when we talk about something being wrong, qada'an means that the qadi has some say in it, right? But like the judge, he can have a say in a matter, and he can say, okay, this is right, this is wrong, you're married, you're divorced, you're guilty, you're not guilty, you're innocent. But diyanatin, in terms of where it comes from, deen, this is what Allah knows, right? So for example, if a man says an expression to his wife that is what's called, which is kinayah, kinayah, and he says a statement to his wife, which could be interpreted as divorce. It's not a clear-cut, unequivocal statement. He says a statement to his wife. He says, like, "Get out of my house," right? Does that mean divorce? Does that mean whatever? If he says that statement and he meant divorce by it, that's what he actually meant. He said, "I'm ending the marriage." That's what he meant inside. But he said, "Get out of my house." That was his expression. Get out of my house. He goes to the judge, all right, or he's brought before the judge. The qadi says, "What did you mean when you said that statement?" The man says, "No, I just meant get out of my house for a few hours." He lies. He said, "No, I just meant, leave me alone for a few hours. I didn't mean get out of my house forever. I didn't mean divorce." The judge says, "Okay, fine. You're still married." So the judge says you're still married, but Allah knows he's not. Right? There's a difference, right? We can think deeply about this, right? There are certain things that you might think are okay on the surface, but only Allah knows what's really going on. Then he brings up the idea. He says, you might have an idea. He says, maybe there's an idea that makes one have bad etiquettes regarding Allah Exalted's rights and his immense attributes. Okay, so you might have a bad idea about Allah. You might have bad etiquette with Allah, right? You might have a bad thought about something that Allah does, right? Like, why did Allah do that? Why did Allah let that happen? And as Imam Ghazali says, that could be seen as worse. Allah could see that as worse than drinking wine or engaging in fornication and committing all other major sins, just because you had this idea in your head, right? You don't really know how Allah is going to judge that, so you have to be careful. And then Ibn Atta'illah, then he quotes Imam Ibn Atta'illah al-Iskandari in his Hikam, where he says that disobedience that results in humility and brokenness is better than obedience that results in pride and arrogance. And of course, Imam al-Buti qualifies that in a footnote. He says, now, never ever think that, right? In the absolute sense, of course, obedience is better than disobedience, right? Absolutely, all the time, under every circumstance. However, what we're talking about is the consequences. So he says sometimes disobedience that leads to repentance, leads to tawbah, where you disobey Allah, but then that causes you to regret what you did, and then you turn to Allah and you ask Allah for forgiveness, and you feel bad about what you did, you feel remorse, and that actually draws you nearer to Allah. That's better than obedience that leads you to be proud of yourself and you feel good about yourself. Well, look what I did, right? That makes you arrogant. Then he goes on to talk about, he says, how would you know about the disobedience that makes a person feel humble and broken and the obedience that makes a person feel proud and arrogant? So again, when we're looking at these people around, we say, okay, why is this righteous person always suffering afflictions? Why is this this other person seems to be always sitting all the time? He seems to be living an okay life. What's wrong? Again, you don't know what they're doing again behind closed doors. Maybe the guy who you see always sinning, again, maybe he's always repenting to Allah. Whereas the other individual who's outwardly doing all these righteous actions, maybe they just fill him with pride and he just feels good about himself. And he never actually turns to Allah in any sort of humility. And then he talks about istidraj, all right? Now, istidraj, and this is mentioned, what I put in a footnote as being gradually led into destruction. So istidraj, and this is mentioned in Surah Al-Qalam, the 60th chapter, verses 44 and 45, where Allah says, "Sanastadrijuhum min haythu la ya'lamun." We will lead them step by step into destruction from where they do not know. I will allow them more time. My subterfuge is true, or my subterfuge is sure. Like I plot against these people in a good way. Now, what we mean by this, what we're getting at here, is that there are certain people who you'll see them, they could be committing sins, especially in the case with unbelievers, but could be some Muslims as well. People who are committing sins and they seem to have no trials, no tribulation coming their way, and you think like, why is that happening? This guy, like, he sleeps through Fajr every day. This guy runs a bar. This guy, nothing's happened to this. Why? Right? Another thing to bear in mind is, if it's istidraj, this means that Allah is just leaving that person to it, and then in the next life, this person will be punished. So again, you might think like, oh, this guy's got it good. No, he does not have it good. He's not in a good situation. So he quotes a few more ayat, but I think a key thing that stands out is there's a hadith on the next page, on page 71, where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, when Allah wants good for his slave, he punishes him for his sins in this life. Right? That's a hard-hitting hadith. Right? So you have to think in terms of, okay, whatever tribulations I'm going through, at least if it's punishment in this life, because we don't want to see the punishment. Allah has described the punishment in the hereafter. We have no idea what it's really like, and we certainly do not want to see it. Not even for a fraction of a second. You do not want to experience it. So any tribulations coming your way, you should be grateful to Allah. So he says here, and then another hadith, he quotes Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, if Allah wants good for someone, he causes him to have losses. Right? He's going to lose things. He's going to lose money. He's going to lose loved ones. He's going to lose his health. He's going to have these kinds of problems. He says, therefore, why does knowing this fact not make you thank Allah the Exalted and enduring yourself with patience with his tests, when you see that he is testing you while exempting someone else? Maybe you are someone whom Allah has favored. So you're going through trials and tribulations. Maybe you're someone who Allah has favored with his mercy. He's giving you trials and tribulations and adversity in this life in order to cleanse you of your sins, and then he's drawing you closer towards him and towards being his slave and towards his protection. So he says you have to think about this, think more deeply about this. And then he brings up another brilliant point where he says, again, I remind you, just because this is true, the veracity of this principle, like this is true. Some people are under istidraj. Some people are committing sins openly, but in private, they're repenting to Allah, Allah's forgiving them. There are some people who are righteous outwardly, but inwardly they're not. And the law is punishing them for it. But just because this is true, he says, that does not necessitate that you have the ability to apply it in relation to various individuals. Okay? In other words, just because this is true, it doesn't mean you can identify who it is. Yeah, so-and-so over there, yeah, that's definitely a sidraj. Yeah, so over there, yeah, he's a righteous guy, but he sins in private. That guy over there, yeah, he's outwardly sinful, but inwardly he repents. Because again, you don't know, right? So this principle is true, and you should be aware of this principle, and you can say to yourself, okay, maybe that's the case with so-and-so, maybe that's the case with so-and-so, but you do not know, right? There's no way for you to know. Only Allah knows. So that's why it says you are not capable of knowing what is within people and seeing the intricacies of their states. And he says the Sharia has a standard by which people's outward states are judged, but in inward matters that are only disclosed to Allah the Exalted. Right? In inward matters, they are only for Allah. So, for example, and we know this from fiqh. To give you an example from fiqh, when we talk about the prayer, for example, maybe I mentioned this in previous sessions, but when we talk about the prayer has sihha, and the prayer has qubul, right? We talk about the prayer can have validity. It's a sahih, it's a valid prayer, but then it can have acceptance with Allah. Now, when we talk about fiqh deals with the sihha, right? Fiqh can tell you, okay, if your prayer to be valid, you need to have wudu, right? For your wudu to be valid, you need to make the intention, you need to wash your face, you need to wash your hands up to the elbows, you need to wipe your head, you need to wash your feet, and it has to be that tartib. And then when you pray, you have to be facing the qibla, and you have to have clean clothes, a clean body, clean place of prayer. The prayer time should be mentioned, and then you start the prayer, and then you have to have the takbir al-ihram, and then you recite the Fatiha, and then you have to do ruku and i'tidal and sujood, and so on and so forth. Right? That's what the fuqaha will tell you. They'll say if you do your prayer in that way, you're wudu in that way, your prayer is valid. Okay, your prayer is valid, right? Now, is your prayer accepted? Does Allah accept your prayer? Well, that's again, only Allah knows. What's your intent? What's your real intention behind praying? Are you merely doing it to show off? Are you while you're actually in the prayer and you're reciting the Fatiha, are you actually concentrating on the Fatiha, or are you're calculating your bills? Right? What are you doing while you're praying? You see, because so that's only Allah. So that's something that only Allah knows. So the faqih can say, yeah, your prayer is valid. You fulfilled these conditions, but that's only the outward. Only Allah knows if your prayer is actually accepted, in the sense that you were actually concentrating, you actually had the right intention, you had a khushu', and so on and so forth. And then the next chapter talks about the logic of slavehood, right? So again, this is a really, really, really important thing to understand when we talk about trials and tribulations that we go through, and why Allah puts people through trials and tribulations. So what Imam al-Buti does in this chapter is he takes the reader sort of back to ground zero, back to sort of square one, back to looking at the real big picture. And he says, everything that we have mentioned falls under the logic of research and discussion based on the foundation of pure rational investigation. If the researcher, this is you're the bahith, you look at your essence, you become familiar with your true identity, and you realize that you are Allah's own slave. You are Allah's own slave, and he can do whatever he wants with you. He will realize that being doubtful or skeptical does not make any sense. So here's the thing. If you are Allah's property, then it's his right to do whatever he wants with you. So for example, if I go to a supermarket and I buy a sack of potatoes, I can do whatever I want with that sack of potatoes, right? I can make boiled potatoes, I can make French fries, I can grill them, I can do whatever I want with them. And I can throw them away if I want to, right? Now you might say, okay, throwing away, that's wasteful food. Yeah, but still they're my potatoes, right? I'm not actually transgressing on anyone else's rights. I'm not stealing Jalaluddin's potatoes, right? They're mine. I can do what I want with them. So this is something that is really crucial when we start understanding, because again, you saw the next page, when we talk about justice, and again, the other word in Arabic is dhulm, right? We're talking about adl and dhulm. So like dhulm, as the Arabs define dhulm, is wad'u shay'in fi ghayri mahalli, to put something other than its place, like things a place where they belong. And things belong to people, right? So injustice is when you do something to someone else's property, right? And to comment on this further, and this is a discussion, I might have mentioned this before in a previous discussion, but when we try to understand, for example, economic models, because people have all these discussions about, where does Islam fit in? Is it more like capitalist, or is it more communist, or is it more libertarian, or is it more socialist, or whatever it is? The key difference, what it all boils down to, is this. What it all boils down to is that when you look at these sort of economic models, they tend to fall, that they're secular, and they tend to circle around, or to they rotate around it, or revolve around this idea of who owns the body, right? So if you go in the more, like, say, communist direction, it's well, the state owns you, right? The state owns your body, and therefore the state can tell you what to do, and the state can make decisions, and the state can tell you that this is where you're going to study, and this is where you're going to work, this is what you're going to do, and so on and so forth. And if we want to do medical experiments on you after you die, then that's our prerogative, because we own you, right? You go to the other side of the spectrum, of the political spectrum, and then you get like the libertarian view, like which is espoused by people like the American economist Walter E. Williams, the Austrian School of Economics. They're going to say, well, the individual owns the body. So like, you own your body, right? So your body is your private property, right? So they'll say, okay, because your body is your private property, we can establish various crimes like murder, rape, assault, kidnapping, those are all crimes because they are violations of private property, right? If you hit me, you are violating my private property. If you assault me, you are violating my private property. If you murder me, you are violating my private property. Whereas, but on the flip side, it's like, because my body's my body, I can do what I want with it, right? So if I want to put tattoos on it, if I want to put piercings on it, if I want to put drugs inside of it, if I want to kill myself, that's perfectly legitimate because it's my body. I do what I want with it. You see, so you can see how that goes from an extreme, right? Whereas the truth of the matter, we're Muslims, the truth of the matter is that Allah owns your body. That's the truth of the matter. Allah owns your body, right? And therefore Allah can say, don't put pork in that thing. Don't put alcohol in there. Don't get a tattoo, right? When you die, this is what happens, right? Because Allah owns you. He owns you. He owns your body. This is why the fuqaha have had interesting discussions about organ donation, right? Like, can I donate my organs after I die? And then, like for example, as a Sheikh Sha'rawi, his answer was, how can you donate something you don't own, right? Like the foundation of tabarru of donations, that you have to own the thing. Well, you don't own it. How can you donate something you don't own, right? And then also fuqaha have allowed for emergency situations, right? Like, you can't just donate what you don't own, but obviously in an emergency situation, if, for example, you want to give an organ to a loved one or to someone else who needs it, and the doctors give the test and say, yes, you would survive without this organ, and so would. Yes, there are fatwa on this. But again, the principle is that Allah owns you. Allah owns your body. So when you understand that, then all this talk about, why does this happen, and this injustice, and no, the point is Allah is absolutely just. Allah owns you. Allah can do whatever He wants to, and that's why He says if Allah wanted to, He could put all of us in the fire and He would be absolutely just. He could put all of us in the paradise and He would be absolutely just, because we're just His slaves. He owns us. He can do whatever He wants with us, right? But we should bear in mind that Allah has made promises to us, right? So if you go, for example, if you look at Surah Tawbah, the 9th chapter, verses 68 and 72 on facing pages, Allah has promised the believers that they will have paradise, right? That's on ayah 72. Ayah 68, Allah promises the unbelievers and the munafiqun that they will have the fire. Allah keeps His promise. But in the absolute sense here, because Allah owns us, He can do whatever He wants with us. And then the other thing that Imam al-Buti makes, the other key point he makes here on these two pages, on page 74 and 75, and again, this is an idea that comes from the West and has creeped into some Muslims, is he addresses what's called the problem of evil. Okay. And you hear this, this is very common, like in Christian theology, and then atheists now come up with this idea nowadays, that they'll say, well, if there's a God, why do people suffer, right? Why do kids get brain cancer? And why are there train wrecks? And why are there tornadoes and these kinds of things? And then what we have to realize is, wait a second. So you're saying that if God does exist, then this world should be paradise? But you don't believe in paradise because that's kooky stuff, right? But that's what they're essentially saying. They're saying, if there's a God, then this world should be perfect, right? No one should get sick, no one should die, no one should go hungry, no one should be poor. It should just be complete nirvana, just absolute paradise, absolute bliss, no struggling. And that's obviously completely, utterly not true, right? But the problem where they're coming from is they don't understand. They don't understand that there's no such thing as intrinsic good and intrinsic evil. That's why Imam al-Buti says on page 76, the qualities of good and evil in things are relative. There's no such thing as intrinsically good, intrinsically evil. Rather, what is good is what Allah tells you is good, right? If Allah tells you, do this, and commands you to do, well, that's a good thing. If Allah tells you not to do something, then it's a bad thing, right? It depends on the hukm. And that's why, for example, in books of theology, like in the Qur'an by Imam al-Buti, but even in books of usul fiqh, like al-Wajiz by Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Hitu, they explain that when we talk about a hukm, right? A hukm, like what is a ruling? How do we define a ruling in the Sharia? A ruling is something, a hukm is khitab al-shari' muta'allaq bi af'al al-mukallifin, right? So like a ruling is what Allah has said. It's the lawgiver, Allah, is what he has said in connection to the actions of legally responsible people, right? So Allah says, if someone does this, that's haram, that's halal, that's wajib, that's makruh, that's mandub, and so on and so forth. So there's no when we understand that, that's how we know things are good or evil. Because again, we can't even say, for example, that fasting is intrinsically good, right? Fasting is not intrinsically good. Fasting is wajib in Ramadan. It's recommended on Mondays and Thursdays and the 3 meal days, but it's haram on Eid. It's haram on the days of Tashriq, right? Prayer is wajib at certain times, nafil at certain times, but other times it shouldn't be done, right? Like after Asr, right? When the sun is at its zenith, right? When the sun's going to the zawal, there are times when you shouldn't pray, and so on and so forth, right? There are times, Hajj is commanded, but there's times we should not do Hajj. It's not permissible to do Hajj, right? It's not valid to do Hajj, and so on and so forth. So everything goes back to Allah's ruling. There's no such thing as intrinsic good or evil, and this is why a lot of people in the West, they got caught up in this stuff, and they tried to understand, like, well, what they look at the way the world is, and they think, oh, this is evil that this happens. It's evil that there's a train wreck. It's evil that a crocodile ate someone. But like, under what standard are you judging? Like, who determines what's good or evil? All right, and even from culture to culture, there's difference. I mean, I remember one of my teachers told me, I think there's a tribe, like an indigenous tribe in South America, I think in Venezuela. One of my teachers told me about this, and so they live in the jungle, and for them, if a woman in their tribe gives birth to twins, they see it as an evil omen. That's what they see. We think, oh, beautiful twins. Oh, they see it as an evil omen, and they kill the babies. They grab them by the legs and bash their heads open against trees. Right? It's horrific stuff. But they think they're doing a good thing. They think that if we let these kids grow, they'll bring about some sort of evil for us. Like, it's an evil sign having twins. Right? So how can we talk about good and evil in this absolute intrinsic objective sense when clearly people differ from culture to culture around the world? Right? Our only option, therefore, is to go back to Allah, what Allah has said, and Allah will tell us what's good and what's evil. Allah will tell us what's righteous and what's not righteous. So, grasping this fact, as Imam Ramadan said, grasping this fact is the necessary foundation for understanding every meaning of Allah's slavehood, of man's slavehood to Allah, and Allah's divine power over his creation. So, when we understand that Allah has power over all things, Allah created everything, Allah determines what's good or evil, then who are we to question? And that's why he finishes with a story about a man who came to him who had only one child, and this child of his passed away. And so this man says to Imam al-Buti, he says, I only had one child, no other. Allah took him from me, and I loved him so much. Why did he do that to me? I'm not aware that I disobeyed him in something, or that I fell short in something that he has commanded me. Okay, and again, you can see, like, this is the kind of like the merchant way of thinking. Like, I did my part of the deal, and why is he doing this to me? Right? So Imam al-Buti says, maybe that's true, but like, maybe you've not fallen short in your obligations, but you have no say in what you were asking about. It's not your say, because you said the child is not your property. Right? You're saying, well, why did Allah take my child away from me? Who told you it's your child? Right? It's just your child? No, it's Allah's child. That's Allah's slave, right? So maybe the child is, rather, both of you are Allah's property. So he willed to entrust him to you for a certain period of time, and then he took him from you, right? The child is not your property, it's Allah's property. Allah gave the child to you as an amana. It's a trust, in the same way that your body is an amana from Allah, right? That Allah's given you to take care of. It's a tool of worship. It's an instrument of worship. You have to take care of it for the time that you have it. And then when the time had come, he took him from you. He has informed you that you are his slave, and that you have to realize this slavehood by being content with whatever he decrees for you. If you do not realize your slavehood to him willfully, you be a Muslim and you voluntarily worship Allah and accept that you are a slave, Allah will make you realize it by force. And the difference between the two states, then the former, you're rewarded by Allah, and in the latter, you will be punished. So Imam al-Buti then says to him, today you're complaining and you're objecting to this, but are you going to carry on like this? Are you going to spend the rest of your life carrying on? Why not just accept it? Just accept it. Just accept it now, because eventually you're going to have to die. You're going to accept that. Like Allah took your child back. Allah will take you back as well. Are you to be able to object when that happens? No. You are Allah's slave, and there's nothing you can do to object to it. There's nothing you can do to resist it. Right? Shaking your fist at Allah is not going to change anything. It's not going to make you feel any better. Absolutely not. So he says, why not? He says, well, therefore, why do you not submit today in happiness and contentment to the one who will make you submit tomorrow in humiliation and by force? Just accept it now. All right. And that's what the word Islam means. The word Islam means submission. It means surrender. You give in to Allah. You don't resist what He's decreed and what He's will. You accept it. You accept that Allah is, you're His slave. He's your Lord. He does whatever He wants, and there's nothing you can do to change it. And once you understand that, then your life is made contented. So I think as a final point, as we finish session 7, as a final point to throw in here is that I remember Imam al-Buti mentioned this in his other book, Al-Hub fi al-Quran. He made this point where he said that he said that when it comes to dua, for example, right? And people fall into two categories regarding du'as. Like now, we always make du'as, and when we make du'a, especially like the du'as that the Messenger of Allah has taught us, or the du'as that are in the Quran. But for example, when it comes to personal du'as, right, where people ask Allah for a personal thing, they say, "Oh Allah, help me get that job," or "Allah, help me get that good grade," or "Allah, help me have children," or "Allah, give me righteous children," or "Allah, help me find a pious wife or a pious husband." He said people fall into two categories. Some people do those du'as because they enjoy it and it draws them nearer to Allah, and they're manifesting their slave to Allah by doing these du'as. But then there are other people who never make those kinds of du'as. They never do, because they just trust in Allah that Allah will do what's khair for them. They're kind of detached, right? So they ask Allah for khair. They do all the du'as. Allah atina fid dunya hasana fi akhirati hasana qina adhaban nar. Allah, give me hasana on this dunya, give me hasana on the akhirah, save me from the fire. And for them, that's enough. They're like, okay, well, I've asked Allah for good, I've asked Allah for hasana, I've asked Allah for khair, and I'll let Him decide. Right? So there's two schools on this. Imam Sha'arawi has a video about this, which I could share with you, where he talked about it's called Allah knows what is good for you. And he says, he elaborates this point that you obviously, when you ask Allah for something, you are asking for khair, fundamentally, whatever it is you're asking for, the new job, or to get married to someone, or to pass or to get a good grade at school, or whatever it is, whatever you're asking for, you're always asking for khair fundamentally. No one asks for something bad. You're always asking for something khair, but the difference is Allah knows what's khair for you, and you don't. Right? So if you're asking Allah for something that you think is good, and then Allah doesn't give it to you, you can't say that, well, Allah didn't answer me. That's what this Imam Sha'arawi is explaining. So you can't say, well, Allah didn't answer me, Allah didn't answer my dua, because the reality is you ask for khair, and Allah is giving you khair. Allah knows where your khair lies. Allah knows that your khair lies in something else and not in this thing that you're asking for. This is what Allah knows, and you don't know. So with that, we'll finish. Alhamdulillah, and I will open the floor then for questions and comments and so forth. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.